Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the 500 billionth, 100 millionth Bible study in our 5-minute Bible study series. I actually think we're somewhere maybe around like 600 or something, which is actually about halfway now that I think about it. There's 1,189 chapters in the Bible, and we're probably about halfway through. Maybe for tomorrow's video, I'll actually figure out if we've made it halfway through the chapters of the Bible. That would be a good milestone. I haven't looked in a while, so I'll check on that. But before we do that, let's talk about Psalm 109 today. There's a free PDF that you can download on our website. There's a link in the description. Who's the author of Psalm 109? Well, once again, we have David, and this is a very David-esque psalm. We'll talk about that in our themes and especially in our definition section today. I do have two passages of scripture from the New Testament that could potentially be referencing back to Psalm 109. The first one would be Acts chapter 1, verse 20, and then Matthew chapter 27 and verse 39. This psalm is pretty typical of David, and that's seen in our two themes. Number one, David recognizes his need for God to help him with the enemies that are surrounding him. And then number two, David prays to God to curse his enemies. And that leads us into the first word that we want to define today. And it's not a word that's in the text, but it is an important word to understand these particular psalms because they kind of get lumped together into a group known as the imprecatory psalms. An imprecation is a curse spoken over a person or a group of people. Psalm 109 is an imprecatory psalm. It's one in which David is asking God to curse his enemies. And if you want to know more about imprecatory psalms, we discuss them a little bit more in our application section for Psalm 5. So if you want to go back and look at that, I'll give you some more details. We do have one other word we want to define, and that's the word posterity. I sound fancy when I say that. Posterity. Verse 13. It's a really simple word to define. Posterity is just the descendants of a person. Like their children, their grandchildren, their great-grandchildren, and so on. So let's take a look at the imprecations that appear in chapter 109 as we look at our first section of our outline. A curse against David's accusers. That's what I've titled verses 1 through 20. So the first part of 109 is a series of curses, a record of curses that David spoke over his enemies that he wanted God to do for him. He was encircled by men who hated him, men who lied about him, men who accused him falsely. They returned David's love with hatred. David treated them well, they treated David terribly. David was fed up with them, and he asked the Lord to send a number of curses on them, and this is basically a list that we're going to look at next. So they had been accusing David. Now David prays to the Lord to send accusers against them and for them to be found guilty, to get a taste of their own medicine. He asked God for their lives to be cut short, for their wives to be widows, and for their children to be orphans. So these are very serious curses. He prayed for them to fall into poverty and to be harassed by creditors, for their family lines to be cut off, for their posterity, and for no one to show them any kindness. David wrote that these men cursed other people so much that it was as if they wore curses as clothing, like they were their daily garments that they put on in the morning. He prayed that those curses would sink into their skin and that they would get a little bit of what was coming to them, that they would receive what they had been doling out to all the people of their community. So that's the series of curses that David asked God for. Now, we're going to see David asking the Lord for more help in verses 21 through 31. David was angry with these terrible men, but we see here that he didn't seek vengeance without the counsel of the Lord. It appears that David had been oppressed by these wicked men for a long time. He talks about how he was exhausted, how he had fasted, and he didn't have any fat on his body. Sounds like these people were really stressing him out. He recognized his own weaknesses, his own inability to deal with all the things that were coming at him, and he prayed that the Lord would help him with the situation. And I do think that this says a lot about David. It takes a lot in a man not to respond immediately to people who mistreat you. But here we see him waiting, going to the Lord for help, for guidance, for direction. He's patiently dealing with this problem, making sure that it's taken to God before he takes any action. He wanted the consequences that were coming to these men for it to be clear that God was bringing judgment on these men. When the consequences of these men's wickedness finally arrived, he wanted everyone to know that it was the Lord who brought them. David prayed confidently as he waited for this day of deliverance to come, saying at the end of the chapter, for God, stands at the right hand of the needy one to save him from those who condemn his soul to death." So, David is struggling. These people are oppressing him. But again, as we always see in the writings of David, it ends with a statement of confidence that God is going to deal with this situation. Okay, so there you have it. That is Psalm 109. Let's talk about our application. We're going to take it from David's enemies today. It's easy when you read these Psalms to always read yourself in as the main character, in this case, David. We may find that it's easy to relate with David. We notice other people when they oppress us, when they lie about us, when they treat us unfairly, or when they tear us down. But let's make sure also to examine ourselves to ensure that we aren't playing the part of David's enemies, of the critics. It's not hard at all to look at yourself and to say, oh, yeah, I'm a victim of all this mistreatment. Everyone treats me poorly. That's why I'm not succeeding. But it's a lot harder to recognize when maybe some of your actions are actually oppressing other people. Are we hypercritical of other people? Are we trying to tear other people down unjustly? Are we willing to lie about others even to elevate ourselves? Or do we take advantage of other people when an opportunity arises? Do we relish when other people stumble? These were some of the characteristics, no doubt, of David's enemies. And as I just mentioned, it's easy to see ourselves as the victim of these things and to see the faults of other people who are doing these things to us all the time. That's easy to do. But it takes a self-aware person and a God-directed person to notice ugly tendencies in one's own heart that could potentially be doing harm to others.